Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when America's beloved Julia Roberts walks onto The View expecting a lighthearted chat, but ends up face-to-face with Joy Behar in a fiery debate about whether younger generations are abandoning traditional American values? The studio was packed. Viewers tuned in for laughter and nostalgia, but they got something entirely different. What started as polite conversation about family, morals, and the state of modern culture quickly turned into one of the most intense moments daytime TV has seen in years. Julia's calm grace met Joy's trademark sarcasm head-on. From faith and family dinners to respect, work ethic, and patriotism, nothing was off the table. The audience gasped, clapped, and shifted in their seats as two women from very different worlds went toe-to-toe, neither backing down. By the time it was over, social media was on fire. Clips spread across TikTok, headlines called it The View's most explosive moment, and fans couldn't stop arguing. Was Julia Roberts right, or had she finally met her match in Joy Behar?
Before we dive into this clash, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Also, comment your thought on, should older actors be given more lead roles? Now, back to the show. The morning light poured through The View's studio windows as the audience buzzed with excitement. The crowd wasn't just here for another roundtable chat. They were here because Julia Roberts, the woman America once called the smile of the century, was in the building. Whoopi Goldberg introduced her with that unmistakable grin. Please welcome Academy Award winner, philanthropist, and all-around icon, Julia Roberts. Applause thundered. Julia walked in wearing a tailored navy suit and her trademark confidence. She waved warmly, that radiant smile lighting up the room as she hugged Whoopi and gave Joy Behar a polite, measured greeting. "Welcome back, Julia," Joy said, smirking. "It's been a while. You look like you've been hiding out in the mountains somewhere." Julia laughed softly. "Close enough. I've been at home, trying to keep up with my kids and stay off the internet. It's harder than it sounds." The audience chuckled, the kind of laughter that breaks ice, but Joy's tone already hinted at a coming storm. Whoopi leaned in. "Julia, we're glad you're here because today's topic is something people have a lot of opinions about. Are younger generations abandoning traditional American values?" The applause turned uncertain, half enthusiasm, half anticipation. Julia smiled, but her eyes sharpened. "That's a big question, Whoopi. I don't think they've abandoned values. I think they're trying to redefine them." Joy raised an eyebrow. "Redefine or replace?" Julia's tone stayed calm. "Redefine. Every generation thinks the one after them is lost. But what I see in young people, my kids, their friends, is compassion, awareness, and honesty. Those are American values too, aren't they?" The audience murmured in agreement, a small wave of claps rippling through the studio. Joy smirked, tapping her cue cards. "Sure, but when was the last time compassion paid the bills? Or when being aware made someone show up on time to work?" A few people laughed uncomfortably. Julia smiled, though her jaw tightened just slightly. "I don't think kindness and responsibility cancel each other out, Joy. You can care about others and work hard." Sonny Hostin, sitting beside Joy, nodded thoughtfully. "I think Julia's right. I see a lot of young people who volunteer, who speak up. They just show their values differently." "Yeah," Joy shot back. "Mostly on TikTok." The audience reacted instantly, half laughter, half groans. Julia let out a small sigh and tilted her head. "You know, Joy, maybe we should give them a little more credit. They're growing up in a world that's far more complicated than the one we did. They're carrying student debt, social media pressure, political division, things we didn't have to juggle at that age." Joy crossed her arms. "So what, we just excuse them for everything?" Julia smiled again, but it was thinner now. "No, but I think understanding is not the same as excusing." The crowd broke into applause, sensing the quiet conviction behind her words. Whoopi, always the peacemaker, tried to keep things balanced. "So, Julia, what do you think traditional values mean today?" Julia thought for a moment. For me, it's gratitude, respect, family, but that doesn't belong to one time period. You can believe in hard work and still embrace progress. Joy chuckled dryly. That sounds nice on a Hallmark card. A few gasps from the audience followed. Julia's smile didn't fade, but her eyes flickered with something sharper now. Maybe, but sometimes Hallmark cards have more wisdom than what we see online these days. The audience erupted in laughter and cheers, some clapping, others whistling. Even Whoopi cracked a grin. Joy raised her eyebrows, feigning surprise. Oh, we're throwing shade now? Julia leaned forward slightly, her tone still measured. Not shade, just perspective. For a moment, the two women locked eyes. Joy's defiant, Julia's steady. The tension wasn't loud yet, but it pulsed beneath every word. Whoopi, sensing it, interjected with a light joke. Okay, let's all take a breath before this turns into the View Civil War. The audience laughed, the sound cutting through the pressure for a second, but it was clear. Something deeper was brewing. As the segment continued, Joy prodded again. I just think this idea of modern values is an excuse. Kids don't talk to their parents. Families don't eat dinner together anymore. That's not redefining, it's erasing. Julia looked at her, calm but firm. Maybe we just communicate differently now. My family group text is a circus, but it's still love. Connection doesn't die, it adapts. The audience cheered, sensing the subtle spark between tradition and evolution. Whoopi smiled, wrapping up the segment. All right, this one's heating up already. Don't go anywhere. After the break, we'll dive deeper into what American values really mean in 2025. As the applause rose and cameras faded to commercial, Joy shot Julia a knowing grin. Julia returned it with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. The stage might have looked calm, but everyone watching, inside the studio and at home, could feel it. The real fireworks were just beginning.
When the cameras came back from commercial, the air in the studio felt different. The smiles were there, but tighter. The laughter, thinner. Everyone sensed the conversation had only scratched the surface. Whoopi leaned forward, setting the tone again. We're back with Julia Roberts talking about whether younger generations are walking away from traditional American values. Julia smiled politely, but Joy Behar was already ready with her next jab. Julia, Joy began, you keep saying the younger generation is just adapting, but let's be real. You've been in Hollywood your whole adult life. You don't exactly live like the average American family, do you? The audience went still. Julia's smile faltered for a half second. She folded her hands and kept her composure. You're right, I've had an extraordinary career, but that doesn't mean I've lost touch with real life. I grew up in Smyrna, Georgia. I remember what it means to work for what you have. Joy didn't blink. Yeah, but Georgia was a long time ago. You think the average mom out there working 2 jobs, worrying about bills, cares about redefining values? She just wants her kids to respect her, go to church, and stop staring at their phones. A few people in the crowd clapped in agreement. Julia nodded slowly. I understand that. But respect doesn't have to look the same as it did 50 years ago. My kids don't go to church every Sunday, but I see their kindness. I see them standing up for their friends, for people who don't have a voice. That's faith in action, too. Whoopi smiled faintly. That's an interesting point. But Joy wasn't done. So kindness replaces commitment now? Replaces marriage, discipline, patriotism? Julia's voice dropped slightly. Calm, but with steel underneath. No, but maybe we should stop pretending patriotism only looks one way. You can love your country and still want it to evolve. The audience reacted instantly. Cheers and applause drowned out the few scattered boos. Whoopi held up a hand, laughing. Okay, let's keep this one civil. But Joy wasn't smiling anymore. You talk like everything old needs fixing. The traditions that held families together, Sunday dinners, church, the pledge, respect for elders, those weren't problems. Julia met her stare. They weren't problems, Joy, but they also weren't perfect. There were people excluded from that picture,
people who didn't feel seen, didn't feel safe. Progress doesn't erase tradition. It tries to make room for everyone. The audience clapped again. Sonny nodded, speaking for the first time in a while. That's true. You can keep the core values, family, honesty, hard work, but still grow past the old blind spots. Joy sighed. See, that's where I think we lose something. Every generation says they're improving things, but when everything becomes flexible, what's left to stand on? Julia looked at her thoughtfully. Maybe that's the challenge of our time, to stand for something deeper than just nostalgia. That line landed. Even Whoopi paused, giving her a slow nod. But Joy wasn't finished. You say nostalgia like it's a bad thing. Without those old values, Julia, you wouldn't have the America that gave you your career, your freedom, your platform. Don't you think we owe something to the people who built that? Julia didn't flinch. Of course I do. But I also think we owe something to the people still building it, especially the ones whose stories never got told. The audience erupted again, louder this time. The tension had turned into a full emotional current. Joy looked like she was fighting to keep her cool. So you're saying people like me, who believe in the old ways, are just out of touch? Julia shook her head. I'm saying maybe you're holding on too tight to something that's already changed. And that's okay. Change doesn't erase the past. It builds on it. For a moment, there was silence. Then a wave of applause rolled through the room. Whoopi tried to lighten the mood. All right, I feel like I just watched a master class in polite disagreement. Julia laughed softly, easing back in her chair, but Joy leaned in again, not ready to drop it. Let me ask you something honest. Do you ever worry that by moving so far away from tradition, we lose who we are? Julia hesitated, then said quietly, I think we lose who we are when we stop questioning who we could be. The crowd went silent, then burst into applause so loud it drowned out the theme music that started to play for the next break. Whoopi chuckled. Well, that's one way to end a segment. Joy forced a smile, though her eyes flashed irritation. Oh, we're not done yet. I have more questions when we come back. Julia smiled calmly, taking a sip of water. I'll be right here. As the cameras cut to commercial, Whoopi leaned toward Julia. Are you okay? Julia nodded. Fine. I just didn't expect her to come that hard. Whoopi smirked. Oh, that was the warm-up. Julia laughed, shaking her head. Good. I was starting to enjoy myself. The lights dimmed for the break, but the tension didn't. The audience could feel it, the calm before something much bigger. Because when the show returned, it wasn't going to be polite anymore. It was about to turn personal.
When the show returned from break, the energy was different. The laughter had thinned to polite chuckles, and even Whoopi's easy confidence felt a little forced. The audience could feel it. Something was about to give. Whoopi smiled at the camera. Welcome back to The View. We're here with Julia Roberts, talking about whether younger generations are abandoning traditional American values. It's been lively. Joy Behar gave a dry smile. Lively's one word for it. Julia met her eyes with a composed calm, the kind that carried quiet strength. I think these conversations are important, Joy. I don't come here to win an argument. I come here because I love this country, and I want us to talk about how it's changing. Joy crossed her arms. But it's that change that worries me. Everything is being rewritten. What family means, what gender means, what patriotism means. It's like we're supposed to apologize for loving the America we grow up in. Julia tilted her head. No one's asking you to apologize. They're asking you to see that your America isn't everyone's America. That landed like a quiet explosion. The studio audience went silent for half a beat before murmurs and applause filled the air. Sunny Hostin jumped in, her tone measured. But Julia, Joy's not wrong that people feel disoriented. The symbols, the language, the culture, it's all moving faster than they can process. Julia nodded, acknowledging her point. I understand that, but fear of change doesn't stop change. It just makes it uglier. My kids are growing up in a world where they're told to question everything, to make room for difference. I think that's beautiful. Confusing, yes, but necessary. Joy's voice sharpened. So the values that built this country, discipline, faith, family, sacrifice, those are outdated now? Julia leaned forward, eyes steady. No, they're not outdated, but they're evolving. Discipline shouldn't mean silence. Faith shouldn't mean judgment. Family shouldn't mean pretending everything's perfect. Sacrifice shouldn't mean ignoring who you really are. The audience broke into applause again, but Joy's face hardened. You sound like you're lecturing everyone who disagrees with you. Julia shook her head. I'm just saying, sometimes holding on to the past too tightly blinds us to the future we could have. Joy leaned in, her tone growing sharper. And sometimes throwing away tradition leaves us with nothing. You say the younger generation is finding their way, but from what I see, half of them can't look up from their phones long enough to have a conversation. You call that progress? Julia smiled faintly, almost sad. I call it transition. They're growing up in a world we built for them, one obsessed with attention, speed, and spectacle. Maybe the question isn't what they've lost, but what we failed to teach. That stopped Joy mid-response. The crowd reacted with a mix of oohs and applause. Even Whoopi raised her eyebrow, impressed. Wow, she said softly. That's a line. Joy took a breath, trying to steady her voice. You know, Julia, you've spent most of your life being adored. People love you. But sometimes I wonder if that makes it easier to say things like this. It's easy to talk about empathy when the world treats you kindly. Julia's smile faded. The warmth in her face cooled into something resolute. I've been treated kindly, and I've been treated cruelly, Joy. Fame doesn't protect you from pain. It just puts it on display. I've watched people tear each other apart online for years. That's not traditional or modern. It's just cruel. And if we don't change that, no value will save us. The crowd erupted. The applause was thunderous this time. But Joy wasn't backing off. That's fair, but maybe we need a little more toughness instead of all this constant emotional talk. Everyone's offended, everyone's a victim, everyone's healing. What happened to resilience? Julia's eyes flashed. Resilience isn't pretending you're fine. It's getting back up after you admit you're not. The applause swelled again, but Joy was leaning forward now, voice rising. You make it sound like the older generations failed. That's what frustrates me about all this talk. People like my parents fought wars, built communities, raised kids without therapy or hashtags. Don't they deserve some credit? Julia's tone softened, almost tender. Of course they do. My mother worked double shifts as an actress and a mom. She was my hero. But even she would tell you, some of what they carried shouldn't have to be carried anymore. They did the best they could, but now we know better. And when you know better, you do better. The room was silent for a second before a standing ovation broke out. Joy stayed seated, jaw tight. So now you're quoting Oprah on me, you say, with a forced laugh. Julia smiled. If the shoe fits. Even Whoopi couldn't help but laugh at that. The tension loosened for a moment, but only for a heartbeat. Joy leaned in, one last time, her voice sharp but lower now. You know, Julia, I respect what you're saying, but I think people are tired of being told their way of life is wrong. Maybe what younger generations need isn't to throw everything out, but to remember where they came from. Julia nodded slowly. I agree. Remembering is vital. But nostalgia shouldn't be a cage. It should be a lesson. The crowd cheered again, but this time it wasn't just noise. It was emotional. The conversation had moved beyond debate. It felt like something real. Whoopi looked between them and said quietly, Well, that was something. But Joy's expression told the audience it wasn't over. Her eyes were hard, focused. Julia's calm had only made her angrier. The camera zoomed out as the segment faded to commercial, but everyone in the studio knew what was coming next. The real explosion hadn't happened yet, and when it did, the view would never forget it.
When the cameras came back from the commercial break, the tension was so thick it felt like everyone on set was holding their breath. Joy Behar sat forward in her chair, arms crossed, lips tight. Julia Roberts, on the other hand, sat back, calm, composed, but her eyes had a quiet fire. Whoopi glanced between them and forced a smile. All right, welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about whether younger generations are abandoning traditional American values. She gave a small laugh. I think it's safe to say things got spirited. Joy didn't wait for her turn. Yeah, spirited's one way to say it, but I just can't sit here and let people pretend that throwing out everything that built this country is progress. Julia's head tilted slightly. No one's throwing it out, Joy, but you keep acting like change is a crime. Joy's tone sharpened. No, Julia, I'm acting like people are losing the foundation of who we are. You Hollywood types live in a bubble. You think if you tweet something heartfelt or post a speech about kindness, it fixes the world. But out here, real people are struggling, families are breaking, and part of that is because the younger generation doesn't value stability anymore. The crowd gasped. Julia didn't flinch. She waited, breathing slowly, then said, "You think I don't see real struggle? You think I don't understand what it's like to fight for family?" Joy cut in. "Come on, Julia, you've been rich and famous for half your life. You don't live in the same world." Julia's voice stayed steady but cold. "Money doesn't make you immune to pain. You can have all the success in the world and still feel broken inside. You can smile for a camera while your family falls apart behind closed doors." That line hit deep. The audience grew quiet. Even Joy's expression softened for a brief second, but she quickly recovered. "That's fair," she said. "But that doesn't change the fact that this new culture, this everything is fluid, nothing is sacred attitude, is dangerous. It's eroding our values." Julia's tone changed, firmer now. "You call it erosion, I call it evolution. The world is learning to make space for people who never had it. You say it's dangerous because it's uncomfortable, but growth is always uncomfortable." Joy laughed, but it wasn't friendly. "So now it's our fault for being uncomfortable with chaos? You know what I think? The reason people love traditional values is because they gave us order, predictability. You knew what was right and what was wrong. Now it's all gray areas and feelings don't build families." Julia leaned forward, her voice dropping just a notch. "Neither does fear. And that's what most of this tradition you're protecting is built on. Fear of being different, fear of being left behind, fear of losing control." The audience applauded, and Joy's eyes flashed. She turned toward the audience. "So what, now I'm the villain because I believe in family dinners and kids saying please and thank you? Because I think there should be boundaries?" Julia sighed. "You're not the villain, Joy, but you're acting like love has to look one way or it doesn't count." "Love?" she said, scoffing. "Love doesn't mean letting the world fall apart just so no one feels left out. You think tolerance is more important than truth. That's what's wrong with Hollywood. You mistake acceptance for wisdom." Julia finally sat forward, her tone low but cutting. "And you mistake rigidity for integrity. You want to freeze the world in a picture of what you remember, not what's real now." There it was. The air cracked. The audience gasped again. Whoopi held up her hand, trying to calm things down. All right, let's just—" But Joy wasn't stopping. "No, let's finish this." She turned to Julia, voice trembling now with mix of anger and emotion. "You talk about fear like it's some kind of weakness, but fear keeps people cautious. It keeps families from making mistakes they can't undo. That's not poison, that's protection." Julia's tone softened again, almost like she felt the weight of Joy's words. "Joy, I get that. I really do. But maybe the mistake is thinking fear ever protected us. It didn't. It just made us smaller." The crowd broke into applause again, but this time there was something different in Julia's voice. A sadness, not triumph. Joy looked at her for a long moment, then shook her head slowly. "You really believe that, don't you?" Julia nodded. "I do, because I've lived it." Whoopi exhaled, clearly trying to steer the show back. "Well, that's one for the books." But Joy was still staring at Julia. She wanted to say something else, something sharper, but she didn't. Julia didn't gloat, she just looked at her, a quiet empathy softening her face. The camera zoomed out. The show went to its final commercial break, but the energy in the studio didn't reset this time. The audience knew what they had just witnessed wasn't just television, it was raw, uncomfortable truth. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning.
When the show returned from its final break, the studio felt different. The applause sign blinked red, but only a few people clapped. Most of the audience just sat there, quiet, reflective, maybe even a little uncomfortable. What had started as another fiery debate on The View had turned into something heavier, something that stuck to the air like smoke after a fire. Whoopi leaned forward, trying to regain the rhythm. All right, we're back with Julia Roberts and Joy Behar, and I think it's safe to say that was one of the more honest conversations we've had in a while. The camera panned to Julia. She gave a small, genuine smile. Honest is one word for it, she said softly. Joy didn't smile back, but she wasn't angry anymore. Her arms, once crossed tight against her chest, were now resting on the table. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quieter. Look, Julia, I know I can come across strong, maybe too strong, but I've lived long enough to see a lot of change, and not all of it's been good. Sometimes it feels like the world I grew up in doesn't exist anymore. Julia nodded. I understand that, and I get why that's scary. But I don't think the world's worse. I think it's just louder. There's so much noise, so much fighting, that it's easy to forget people are still trying to do good in their own ways. Whoopi leaned in. You both make fair points, she said, in that calm mediator's voice she had perfected over the years. But this is the question at the heart of it. Are younger generations really abandoning traditional American values, or are they redefining what those values mean? Joy looked down for a moment, thinking. Maybe both, she admitted. When I talk about tradition, I don't mean control. I mean the things that connected us, community, responsibility, respect. I feel like those are disappearing. Julia smiled faintly. Those things aren't disappearing, Joy. They're just changing shape. You might not see them in the same places, but they're there. Families look different now, communities look different, but people are still trying. They're still caring. It just doesn't look like it used to. Joy sighed, her voice soft but heavy. You really believe that? Julia looked directly at her. I have to, because if I don't believe people are still good, what's the point of anything? That line hit the room hard. Even the audience, who had spent most of the show cheering and gasping, fell completely silent. Joy leaned back and exhaled slowly. For once, she didn't argue. You know, she said after a pause, maybe that's what gets lost in all these debates. We spend so much time proving who's right, we forget to listen. Julia nodded. Exactly. And we forget that sometimes two people can both be right from where they're standing. The audience began to applaud, quietly at first, then louder. Whoopi seized the moment. Now that's a rare thing to hear on The View. Agreement. The room laughed, and the tension started to melt. But then Julia added something unexpected. I didn't come here to win an argument. I came here because I care about what's happening to families, to people, to kindness. We're all talking about values, but what's more American than trying to understand each other? Joy's eyes softened. Maybe I misjudged you. You're not as Hollywood as I thought. Julia chuckled. Trust me, Joy, no one who's seen how this business really works would ever call it glamorous. Even Joy laughed at that, and the audience followed. It was the first time since the debate began that both women looked genuinely at ease. Whoopi nodded toward them. You know, I think this might be what our country needs more of. This exact thing. Two people who disagree, sitting here, actually listening instead of shouting. Joy looked at Julia again. Well, I'll say this. You got guts. Most guests would have folded an hour ago. Julia smiled. And miss all this? Never. Laughter filled the room again. Ana Navarro, who had stayed mostly quiet during the storm, finally spoke. You know what's funny? We just spent the whole segment arguing about old values versus new ones, and yet the thing that calmed it all down was something that never goes out of style: respect. Julia nodded. Exactly. You don't have to agree with someone to respect them, but you can't claim to love your country if you only love the people who think like you. That drew another round of applause, stronger this time, the kind that feels less like entertainment and more like relief. Joy smiled, a little embarrassed, but also moved. You're good, Julia, I'll give you that. You don't preach, you just speak. Julia laughed. That's because I'm still learning, same as everyone else. Whoopi leaned toward the camera. Well, folks, I think that's a good note to end on. Maybe it's time we stop talking about lost values and start practicing the ones we still have. The audience clapped again, some even standing. The tension that had once divided the room had turned into something softer, almost hopeful. As the camera started to pan out for the closing shot, Joy reached across the table and offered her hand to Julia. She hesitated for only a second before taking it. No scripted ending, no flashy soundbite, just two women, different worlds, different beliefs, sharing a moment of understanding. The audience rose to their feet. Whoopi smiled as the applause swelled. Now that's how you end a show. Julia looked around, visibly moved. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. I know we didn't agree on everything, but this matters. Joy nodded, her voice quiet. Yeah, it does. The lights dimmed a little as the credits started to roll. But what stayed wasn't the argument or the headlines that would follow. It was that rare, fleeting sense of grace that sometimes slips through even the loudest debates. A reminder that for all the shouting, all the division, understanding is still possible. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real American value everyone had been fighting to protect all along.